He didn't have much: a rusted truck, a quiet life, and a heart full of regrets. No one expected Henry Dawson to change anything, let alone anyone. But one night, on a dark stretch of road, he pulled over to help a stranger change a flat tire. What he didn't know was that this simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would rewrite his entire life. This isn't just a story about helping someone, it's about how the smallest moment can become the biggest turning point, and how sometimes the person you save ends up saving you. Henry Dawson was the kind of man the world passed by without ever really seeing. At 62, he was more memory than momentum, scraped together from years of bruises, bad choices, and long silences. His weathered hands told a story his lips rarely shared, a life hardened by abuse, addiction, and abandonment. From the moment he first cried as a child in a house that never gave hugs, Henry had been fighting for air, for peace, for some semblance of love. His parents, if you could call them that, believed in control more than compassion. Every scolding word was a knife, every slap a lesson, every day a battlefield. He escaped, yes, technically. At 9 years old, Henry ran into a foster system that promised safety but delivered indifference. He floated from house to house, never long enough to hang a picture, never secure enough to trust. Without roots, he grew wild. The streets welcomed him with open arms and dirty needles. By 17, heroin had replaced hope. He wasn't always a ghost. Once, Henry loved someone, deeply. Her name was Elise, and she saw past his brokenness, past the tremble in his hands and the hollowness in his eyes. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. For a while, life teased him with normalcy: a steady job at a distribution warehouse, barbecue Sundays, bedtime stories. But demons have long memories. The moment he relapsed, everything unraveled. Elise packed her bags with trembling hands, and the kids looked at him like he was a stranger. That was 20 years ago. And yet, here he was, alive, alone, but alive. That had to mean something. He lived in a rundown 1-bedroom in a part of town people usually drove through, not to. His only friend was Tom Jacobs, an ex-plumber turned handyman whose heart was too big for his modest frame. Tom never judged Henry, even when Henry didn't believe in himself. He was the one who helped Henry through detox, who sat outside the bathroom door with water and stories when the withdrawals were unbearable, who pulled strings to get him a delivery job at Lou's Pizza Shack. Henry lived for routine. Up at 6, jog by 6:15, coffee by 7, deliveries until midnight. Occasionally, a quiet beer with Tom, though never more than one. He couldn't risk slipping again. There was too much history buried beneath his skin. Every laugh was borrowed, every smile a negotiation with guilt. One night, everything changed. He was heading home after a shift that left marinara sauce splattered across his faded hoodie. The streets were empty, except for the distant whir of a bus engine and the occasional flicker of neon signs. That's when he saw her. A young woman, probably late 20s, struggling in the dark with a flat tire. She had a phone clenched between her teeth, using the flashlight to try and align the jack. Henry slowed down. For a moment, he hesitated. It was late, and helping strangers, especially women, could be a recipe for misunderstandings. But something about her frustration, the way she kicked the tire with tears forming in her eyes, it felt familiar. It felt like watching a younger version of himself fighting the universe with bare fists. He pulled up behind her, rolled down his window and honked gently. She turned, startled, but didn't run. Henry stepped out, hands visible, voice calm. Flat tire. She nodded, unsure. Yeah, picked up a nail, I think, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Henry smiled, not the kind that said, I know better, but the kind that said, I've been there. Mind if I help? Her name was Emily. She'd been out with friends, celebrating a new job offer, some marketing firm downtown. The night ended earlier than expected, and her car had betrayed her on the ride home. As Henry worked on her tire, he talked. Not much at first, just enough to ease her mind. Enough to make the silence between them a little less sharp. And then she asked, Do you do this often? Help strangers? He chuckled. Used to be one myself. Figured maybe I could tip the scale a little. She asked what he meant, and that's when the dam cracked. He told her about Elise, about the kids he hadn't seen in years, about Tom, about recovery, about how every day felt like redemption or relapse, no in between. She listened, not politely, but attentively, like his words had weight, like they weren't just noise. When the tire was fixed, she hugged him. No warning, no hesitation, just pure, thankful, human connection. Thank you, she said. You're not the man you think you are. Henry didn't sleep much that night. He missed his crime show, but he didn't care. Something about talking to Emily felt like oxygen. The next day, everything changed again. The morning after helping Emily, Henry woke earlier than usual, driven not by obligation, but by something he hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. For years, every sunrise was just another page in a book he had stopped trying to read. But that day was different. He brewed his coffee with care, took a longer jog, smiled at the sparrows pecking the cracked sidewalk, and even hummed while folding laundry. It was his day off. No deliveries, no stress, just time. Something that usually weighed heavy now suddenly felt like a gift. He told himself he'd visit Tom in the evening, maybe bring a six-pack and sit on the porch like old times. For now, though, he wanted solitude, the kind that didn't echo with regret. As the afternoon sun filtered through dusty blinds, Henry flicked through channels and finally settled on an old comedy rerun. He laughed, really laughed, the sound surprising, even him. Then, just as the laugh faded, a knock came. Not the kind of knock that says delivery or neighbor or sales pitch. It was deliberate. Firm, a presence in itself. Henry's stomach tightened. He wasn't expecting anyone. Tom would have called, and nobody just stopped by in his part of town. Another knock. Henry stood, his hands reflexively wiped on his jeans, a habit from his kitchen days. He walked to the door and peeked out the curtain. A black SUV, polished, intimidating, and standing at the doorstep, a man in an expensive navy suit with two others flanking him. Henry opened the door, cautious but composed. You must be Henry Dawson, the suited man asked, voice calm but carrying weight. I am. Who's asking? I'm James Carter. I'm here on behalf of my sister Emily. The name landed like thunder in Henry's chest. Emily, the girl from the night before. James pulled out his phone and held up a picture. It was her, smiling, frozen in a moment that felt like it belonged to a different universe. She made it home okay? Henry asked, a flicker of concern in his tone. She did. James nodded. And she hasn't stopped talking about the man who helped her. She said you reminded her of our father, right down to the way you spoke, the stories, even how you smiled. Henry chuckled, uneasy. I talk too much sometimes. James smiled. Sometimes the right words find the right people. He reached into his coat and handed Henry a white envelope. Thick, heavy. Henry didn't need to open it to know what it was. He could feel the weight of money, gratitude, wrapped in currency. I can't accept this, Henry said, attempting to push it back. I didn't do anything special. I just helped. James didn't budge. You may think it was nothing, but to Emily, it was everything, and she asked me to make sure you knew that. Henry's voice cracked. This is too much. No, James said gently. It's not enough. Not for someone who saw a stranger on the side of the road and chose compassion over convenience, especially when the world teaches us to look away. Henry stood there, the envelope trembling in his hands. Then the tears came, slow at first, then uncontrollable. Decades of regret, shame, and loneliness poured out through his salt water and trembling shoulders. James stepped forward and hugged him, awkward at first, then firm. She also told me, James continued, that it's always been your dream to work at Golden Leaf Company. Henry's eyes widened. He hadn't spoken that name in years, not since the rejection letter, not since the night he relapsed, reading it in the parking lot of the rehab center. Well, James said with a smile, there's an opening and a training program. 3 months. I put in a word. You just need to submit your resume. The job's yours if you want it. Henry didn't respond. He couldn't. His body betrayed him again. His knees buckled slightly, and he gripped the doorframe for support. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. James placed a hand on his shoulder. Take your time. She's traveling, but when she's back, she wants to see you again. Henry nodded, words lodged somewhere deep in his throat. You're not forgotten, Henry. Not anymore. The following days unfolded like a dream Henry didn't dare wake from. After James Carter's visit, the world around him felt slightly different, brighter, kinder, as if the universe had suddenly remembered he existed. He placed the envelope gently on his kitchen table, unopened for nearly a day. It wasn't the money he feared. It was what it represented, a gesture that said, you mattered. That kind of validation was the foreign territory for a man like Henry. Eventually, he did open it. Inside was more than just cash. It was possibility. Enough to fix up the truck, enough to pay off lingering debts, enough to allow him to breathe without the weight of poverty pressing against his chest every morning. But most of all, it carried dignity. And dignity was something Henry hadn't felt in decades. He dug through his drawers until he found the old, worn envelope with his resume, the one he had submitted to Golden Leaf Company 15 years ago. He'd never thrown it out, almost as if part of him hoped for a second chance he never truly believed would come. That afternoon, with trembling fingers, he revised it, typed out new entries, added the pizza job, left out the years lost to addiction, but emphasized his recovery. Tom Jacobs was the first person Henry called, not to brag, not to boast, but because if there was anyone who deserved to share in this moment, it was the man who never let go of him, even when Henry had given up on himself. Tom showed up 15 minutes later with a six-pack and eyes already misty. You serious? He asked, his voice caught between disbelief and joy. Henry nodded, handing him the letter. 3-month training. They're taking a chance on me. Tom read it twice. Then he sat down hard on the couch, slapped his knee, and said, About damn time the world caught up to your worth. That weekend, they celebrated, not with beer, but with burgers on Tom's tiny backyard grill. Tom's wife made potato salad, and the kids lit sparklers even though it wasn't the 4th of July. Henry laughed until his sides hurt. He forgot what that felt like. The next Monday, he showed up to the Golden Leaf Company in a freshly ironed shirt, clutching his documents like they were made of gold. The receptionist smiled at him, not with pity, but with professionalism. He was no longer just a pizza delivery guy. He was a candidate. The 3-month training program was intense. There were modules on logistics, client service, digital inventory systems, none of which Henry had ever touched before. At first, he struggled. He was decades older than everyone else in the room, and doubt often crept in like an old ghost, whispering, "You're not meant for this." But every time it did, he remembered Emily, her hug, her words, "You're not the man you think you are." He remembered James, showing up with grace, and he remembered Tom, who once said, "You've carried enough regret, Henry. It's time you carried a future." Bit by bit, he pushed through, asked questions, stayed late, studied like a man fighting for breath. At the end of the program, they offered him a permanent position in client logistics, steady pay, benefits, a title. But what Henry cherished most wasn't the job. It was the morning coffee with co-workers, the shared jokes over lunch, the recognition. He was no longer invisible. 4 months had passed since the night Henry Dawson pulled over to help a stranded stranger on the side of the road. What began as a quiet gesture of human decency had unraveled into something miraculous. The man who once counted pennies now counted blessings, not because he'd won the lottery or stumbled into fortune, but because someone saw him, really saw him, and chose to believe in his worth when he no longer could. With the money from Emily and the steady income from his new job, Henry made a decision that shocked even himself. He moved. Out of the creaky apartment with water-stained ceilings and peeling linoleum floors. Out of the space where old ghosts lingered. He found a small but charming home in a quiet suburb across town. A modest front yard, 2 bedrooms, a garden patch he hadn't yet figured out what to plant in. But he didn't move alone. He brought Tom Jacobs and his family with him. When he first made the offer, Tom laughed. "What, you trying to be my landlord now?" "No," Henry smiled. "I'm trying to bring my family with me. Only one I've got." Tom's eyes glossed over. He nodded. No more words needed. The 2 families, if you could call them that, settled into side-by-side homes in the neighborhood. Sundays became potluck evenings. Tom's kids learned how to ride their bikes on Henry's driveway. And Henry, for the first time in decades, had a reason to buy groceries that fed more than one. He redecorated with care. Painted the walls a warm amber, hung framed pictures of nature, bookshelves full of second-hand novels, and eventually a photo, one that James Carter had mailed him, of Emily beaming in front of a city skyline. On the back, she had written, "To Henry, the man who reminded me that kindness is real." Henry read that message every morning before work. Then one Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. Henry opened the door to find James standing there again, this time without the suit. Jeans, polo shirt, a smile that stretched wider than before. "She's back," James said simply. Henry didn't respond. He didn't need to. Moments later, Emily stepped out from the passenger side of the car. Her eyes met his, and time for a breath paused. "Hi," she said. "I owe you another hug." Henry didn't speak. He just opened his arms and they embraced, not like strangers, but like something far more personal, like two people who had survived something enormous and unspoken. They spent the afternoon together, Emily, James, Henry, and the Jacobs family. They laughed over grilled corn and lemonade. Emily told stories from her trip. Henry shared his new recipes. And for the first time, Emily saw not the man who had helped her fix a tire, but the man who had fixed his life. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and the porch lights clicked on, Emily pulled Henry aside. "You know," she said, "I thought that night you were sent to help me. But maybe I was sent to remind you that you still have a future worth living." Henry nodded, his eyes misty. Sometimes the universe sends us angels, even if they arrive with flat tires. Weeks turned into months, and Henry Dawson's new life grew roots. Every morning, he rose before sunrise, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The days felt full now, purposeful, each one a gentle reminder that it wasn't too late to become the man he wished he had always been. At Golden Leaf Company, Henry quickly became more than just an employee. He was a mentor to younger staff, a steady presence others relied on. People gravitated toward his humility, his resilience, and the quiet wisdom he carried in his voice. It wasn't long before HR asked him to lead onboarding sessions for new hires, something he would have laughed at just a year earlier. Tom's kids started calling him Uncle Hank, and Henry wore the title like a badge of honor. He helped with math homework, built a tree swing in their backyard, showed the oldest how to change spark plugs. Each gesture, each moment filled the emptiness that had once devoured his heart. Emily visited regularly. They became unlikely friends, divided by decades in age, united by something deeper: compassion, humanity, shared healing. On one visit, she brought a copy of a blog article she had written, titled "The Stranger Who Changed My Tire and My Life." It told their story. Not just the flat tire, but the man behind it. She wrote about Henry's resilience, about how real kindness doesn't announce itself. It just shows up. Henry read the article silently, then folded the paper neatly and placed it inside his journal. "Why do you write this?" he asked. "Because the world needs to remember," she said, "that people like you exist." That night, as Henry sat on the porch alone, listening to cicadas and sipping warm tea, he thought back to the man he used to be. Broken, number dismissed. And then he thought of that one night, the decision to pull over, to offer help. It had felt like a small thing, almost forgettable. But in truth, it had changed everything. Not just for Emily, not just for James, but for him. Because the real magic of kindness isn't in grand gestures or headlines. It's in the quiet moments that stitch broken people back together. Henry Dawson's story didn't end with addiction or isolation. It didn't even end here. It continued on the porches of neighbors, in the eyes of children who saw him as family, in every person he helped train at work, and in the countless others who read Emily's article and were reminded that good people still walk this earth. And maybe that's the lesson. We never know which act of kindness will echo forever. We spend our lives chasing purpose, waiting for moments that feel big enough to matter. But the truth is, purpose often shows up disguised as a flat tire, as a stranger in need, as a quiet decision to care even when no one's watching. You don't need to fix the whole world. Just show up for someone in a moment that matters. That's where lives are changed. Quietly, completely, forever.